Antony Loewenstein is a journalist and the author of The Palestine Laboratory, a book on Israel's arms and surveillance industry. He joins us now live from Sydney. Antony, thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you first, since May, 600 people have been killed at these distribution points run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. On Tuesday alone, 28 people were killed while waiting for food parcels. That is just staggering. It's horrifying. The UN has called these distribution centers death traps. So I want to ask you, who exactly is behind the GHF? And from your perspective, should the GHF bear primary responsibility for the fatalities that have occurred?
This has always really been a scam from the beginning. And the brief background to this is, of course, that Israel for years, and frankly, the US under the Trump administration, and frankly, many administrations, saw the UN with contempt, regarded the UN in Gaza and frankly elsewhere as not appropriate to deal with these issues, even though the UN is the only real body that can manage this. Therefore, they came up with this sort of scam idea between the US, private business and Israel to so-called distribute aid. It's worth saying that if one reads the Israeli press, which seemingly most Western journalists based there in Israel don't, many Israeli companies, including food companies, are making a lot of money from the food that is going to feed starving Gazans. Now, as you rightly say, cruelty here is the point. Palestinians from the beginning have been saying that they're being killed, and much the international community ignored it. It really took a report last week in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which was a good report, essentially talking about Israeli soldiers saying to the journalists that, yes, they're killing people and there's a direction by commanders to do so, that the world suddenly woke up and said, oh, this seems utterly unacceptable, even though we've known this for months. They bear primary responsibility. And in fact, the US mercenaries who are based there are also legally culpable for what is going on, even though the Israeli soldiers are the ones who are likely doing the vast bulk of the killing of Palestinians.
Antony, UN agencies and human rights experts have said that this GHF model is unsafe. They've said that it is non-neutral. From your vantage point, how much has all of this blurred the line between humanitarian aid and state objectives?
Any human rights organization that one speaks to, and I've often worked in places from South Sudan to Palestine to Afghanistan over the last 20 years, will say that if you start to militarize aid, you are causing hell for yourself and frankly the people who are trying to get that support. And that's exactly what's happening here in Gaza. And it's not surprising that Palestinians are so desperate for food, because Israel essentially has blocked for months any kind of serious injection of aid into the territory. And I mean, ultimately, I think without the UN taking back control, and the UN system was not perfect in Gaza, to be sure, but if aid is allowed in, which it obviously has only been very here and there in the last 21 months, then Palestinians at least will get food, will get some aid, will get some support. And really even today, in July 2025, we have no real indication of what the long-term plan is for Palestinians when this war finally ends, if the genocide is over today, next week, hopefully very soon. What happens to the roughly 2 million Palestinians left? Where is food going to come from? Who is going to provide that? And what worries me about this Israeli-American so-called aid initiative is this is seen as a model. I've written a lot about the issue of Palestine being a model for the surveillance and weapons industry, and it's now exported globally. What I am really hearing is that what Israel and America is doing in Gaza is looked at by other countries as a model. You and I and viewers might see this as a disaster. Civilians are being murdered at huge rates, but that's not an impediment to other countries doing the same thing in their own conflicts. Why? Because there's no accountability. I mean, there's been hundreds, as you say, Palestinians being killed in the last months. No Israeli soldiers are being held to account. There's no trials happening in Israel, and there frankly won't be. Israel investigates itself and usually finds itself innocent. This is what worries me, that what's happening in Gaza is a model that other countries will follow in the months and years ahead.
Antony, in the report that we played just before you came on, we heard Mu'ath al-Kahlout in Gaza put it in the starkest terms possible. He said that Palestinians in Gaza were experiencing either death by bullets or death by hunger. I want to ask you if you believe that what's going on at these distribution sites, does this amount to a war crime?
Well, it does, because the deliberate shooting of civilians who are trying to get aid is undeniably a war crime. And in fact, it fits very much into the bigger picture of the credible allegations against Israel of genocide. People often who dismiss that say that Israel hasn't killed every Palestinian in Gaza, but that's not what genocide is. Genocide can be the attempted destruction of a people's existence, either through culture, it could be through lives, it could be through aid or food. And what Israel has been doing with the aid distribution is clearly part of a genocidal plan. I mean, one only has to listen to Israeli soldiers, commanders, mostly in the Israeli press, or frankly, privately. They often share this information on Telegram channels. There is genocidal intent and genocidal actions. This is not simply my opinion, it's what they're saying. There is an aim of many in the Israeli military and, frankly, Israeli society, based on recent public opinion polls, to destroy Palestinian life, to make it utterly impossible for Palestinians to survive there long term, which fits into the Israeli government plan, which still remains to this day, by the way, to try to remove as many Palestinians as possible from Gaza to God knows where, third countries. That remains the plan. And there's no indication that Washington disagrees with that. In fact, Trump has obviously articulated that himself this year since he returned to office. This is the stark situation that exists. And without alternative viable plans, which I don't see much of being offered by who? The Europeans or Arab states, we are stuck with what I fear is a long-term, not just dislocation, but 2 million or so Palestinians living in squalor in so-called tent cities, even if the war comes to an end tomorrow.
Antony, I'm going to ask you to stay with us for a few more minutes. We're going to come back to you. But for now, that is Antony Loewenstein. Thanks so much.